happened if we hadn't had the Superfast programme and everything had suddenly gone online and found, I mean, obviously in parts of the country it was a real problem, but actually our digital infrastructure held up pretty well. So I think we have to be thinking about just how reliant we are on that and making sure that we consider the risks that entails. Second, and relatedly, and this is effectively what I've just said, but we need to be thinking much more carefully and more strategically about the risks that we're embedding in that increased dependency and how we mitigate them. And I think that's not just us as a single nation, but as a collection of democratic nations. Because if our networks fail to be resilient or secure, and if we find ourselves reliant on components or tech from particular countries or companies, then I think the long-term social and economic impact of those decisions, as well as the security implications, could be very substantial. So how have things gone from that time? How have I taken those lessons into my role as Telecoms Minister? Well, one of my first jobs in the role was to take through the final stages of the Telecoms Security Act, and that's a new law that saw us strip out high-risk vendors from the 5G core. And I think that was the right thing to do, but it was very expensive, and it exposes how the UK really hadn't been giving enough thought over a number of years to critical enabling technologies, supply chain risks, and the standards-setting bodies that govern those technologies. Now, we responded to that with an extensive telecoms diversification programme. Now, what does that mean? It's effectively, we're trying to make sure that we're not in future locked into a narrow set of vendors. And we've built an alliance of countries in the last few years, the Global Coalition on Telecommunications. It's called DCOT, another acronym for us to enjoy. That includes Japan, Canada, the US, Australia, and we're working together much more closely now on things like 6G and future telecoms and things like standards development. And we also have, in the last few years, new powers when it comes to investment. Now, we used not to be able to call in investments into critical sectors, but in 2021, we passed the National Security and Investment Act so that potential investments can be scrutinised, making sure we have much better oversight when it comes to the capital that is going into our telecommunication systems, how entities are managed, and so that we can better address some of those security risks that we might be potentially embedding. Now, obviously, the more devices that we connect to our networks, the greater the cyber risk that we're introducing into them. That's come not just in businesses, but into homes increasingly. So another thing that I did was take through the very drearily named Product Security and Telecoms Infrastructure Bill. And that introduced mandatory basic security standards into things like baby monitors, connected fridges, all of those connected doorbells that we have, so that it becomes a little bit harder to hack a household and create chaos. And when I arrived in the department, we were also dealing with things like the Billsdale mast outage, the impact of Storm Arwen, and all those things really exposed the physical vulnerability of our infrastructure. So Ofcom is now looking at the resilience of telecom services during power outages, looking at whether we have the right requirements when it comes to mobile power backup. Now, because of our experience with 5G high-risk vendors, I asked my team for the horizon to be scanned for other similar vulnerabilities. Now, we already rely on data centres for cloud computing, but that reliance is really going to be intensifying when it comes to AI, which needs increasing levels of storage and compute capability. So we've just closed a consultation on plans to introduce some baseline security measures to protect those data centres. So that's how we're dealing with some of those resilience questions of recent years. We're looking at supply chains, we're scrutinising who wants to invest in our networks, we're building our defences against cyber attack and so on. But if I may just go on to some of the really positive stuff which has been touched on already. I mean, what are we doing to make sure that everybody in our country has the digital infrastructure we need to make sure that people can live wherever they want in the country and have the same economic opportunities? And it's something that I think about very closely because it's not just businesses that are going online. We're going to be seeing more and more healthcare conducted over our digital networks, transport, and even more. Now, as we speak, there's a massive army of people out there, and they're digging trenches, they're throwing up poles, they're connecting cabinets, and it is an infrastructure project really of Victorian levels of ambition in our gigabit rollout. As Alan said, in 2019, we had 6% gigabit capable coverage in this country. That is now at 81%. It is the fastest rollout in Europe right now, and it really speaks to the priority we've given that as a government, understanding just how important the quality of our digital infrastructure is. And we're also doing a lot of work when it comes to mobile connectivity. In 2022, we met our ambition early for the majority of the population to have access to 5G signal by 2027. So as I say, we met it 5 years early, 2022. We have a £1 billion shared rural network to deal with the not spots and partial not spots issue, i.e. All of those gaps in coverage that people find so frustrating in rural communities. But we're also attracting a massive amount of investment into our UK data centre industries. Microsoft and Google recently announced big investments into the UK so that we can make sure that people have access to safe, secure data centres close to their businesses. That's partly because the UK sits at a very important point when it comes to subsea cables. But the tech is also evolving, so we have to evolve with it. We're making sure that we're working on some of the science, the research and development when it comes to future technologies. We're going to be looking at more standalone 5G, development of 6G, satellite, high-altitude platforms, different types of fibre optics. But there is always a lot of work still to do. So I just want to assure you, while you may not be thinking about the ducts, the poles, the cables, the data centres that keep our digital economy going, rest assured there is an entire army of people out there who are thinking about these things. That's part of my role as your minister, and I hope in setting out some of our work that I've given you some food for thought and a level of reassurance that we are on to this.
Fantastic, thank you. James, can I turn to you next?